Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show this evening,
we have established a multidisciplinary revenue committee, and Eskom is part of this committee, to address payment of debt to the utility by municipalities.
President Cyril Ramaphosa and the government to Eskom's rescue. But will the steps he announced today save the country from load shedding? Our experts weigh in.
Let's be clear. The whole concept of BEE is enshrined in our constitution. It is a constitutional imperative.
The president also throws his weight behind black economic empowerment. We hear from organizations on both sides of the debate. The Watchdog starts now. It was his last appearance before Parliament this year, and with the country's energy crisis, a big challenge facing the country today, Eskom-related issues took center stage. From whether the utilities CEO should stay to what is being done to solve numerous problems that load shedding has actually exposed, to who should carry the state-owned enterprises' costs if households, municipalities, private companies and other state entities don't want to pay? And to help us navigate some of those issues, my companions for this segment are analysts Dick Forsland, and Jose Moleshe. A very warm welcome to both of you, and thanks very much for coming on the program.
Good evening, Vuyo.
Yeah, thank you to you too.
Well, let's first hear what the president's views are with regard to the position of Eskom CEO. Now, as far as some MPs are concerned, Andre de Ruyter should have been sacked a long time ago.
From a CEO to a manager, their performance needs to be assessed. And that assessment needs to be embarked upon by the properly constituted body. Now, one of the reasons we have boards is that managements of entities, be they state entities or even in the commercial world, account to boards. And in this case, it is precisely the process that has ensued. Now, you may not be very pleased with that type of process, but that is the most fair process to anybody indeed, and that is the best process that I know, that a board that has been appointed should be the one that does that. Now, there's no state entity that has had as many CEOs as Eskom. And if you start counting them, they are more than 15 or even close on to 20 in the 28 years of our democracy. Now, we need to have a proper assessment of the performance of everybody at Eskom. Just as we also need to have an assessment of the efficiency of our various power stations. And that process, as I said, is underway.
Andre de Ruyter should be given time and space to do his work, says the president. they're responding, of course, to the EFF leader, and that is Julius Malema. Now, with Durator staying on, well, at least for now, what's the plan to deal with the problems he has not been able to deal with up until now?
A range of initiatives are currently underway as a matter of urgency to address the load shedding that we are going through right now. This work, which is being managed by the National Energy Crisis Committee, which is lodged in the presidency and coordinates the various departments, includes ensuring that the units at Kusile are brought into commercial operation and expediting what needs to be expedited at Medupi. The implementation of reliable maintenance through a focus on quality maintenance, but also the recruitment of experienced staff. And we did say at some stage we are going to even bring back some of those old power station managers who not only know the power stations, but who know the sounds of the machines that operate at those power stations. And a number of them who had gone to various places around the world have indicated a great willingness to come back and be utilized. And also, we're focusing on the use of original equipment manufacturers. We're also focusing on 6 priority stations where the maximum benefit can be achieved by improved performance, and these are Kendal, Majuba, Duba, Matla, Tutuka, as well as Kusile. Coordinating efforts also with law enforcement agencies to address sabotage, theft, and fraud continues to disrupt the operations of power stations. A lot of progress is being made in this regard, and we're pushing back the frontiers of fraud and corruption. The other one is addressing the Eskom debt, which we've spoken about, as well as ensuring that we implement the just energy transition. Now, this work is obviously taking place alongside efforts to accelerate initiatives to add more generation capacity to the grid.
Now, Doug, Jose, we are dedicating this time to this conversation, not because we like the president, but because we have an energy crisis facing the country, number one. And number two, not too long ago, the president said to us, watch this space. I am going to be talking about the things we are doing to address the problems, the failures, and everything we have seen. And thirdly, this was his last appearance before Parliament this year, which then makes it an important appearance before the national legislature. Now, I don't know what you're able to pick up, but just from the soundbite we have played, he talks about the National Crisis Committee, which you know about, where Kusile and Medupi fit in. He talks about bringing back old power station managers and engineers, which he did talk about at length during that big address to the nation after coming back from the United Kingdom. We're talking about bringing on equipment manufacturers, which an issue has touched on numerous times before. We're talking about sabotage, that disrupts power stations and what is being done there, dealing with fraud and corruption after years of state capture and so on. We're talking also about the Eskom debt. I don't know if any of you, both of you, were able to pick up anything new or different, or something that gives us hope that going forward we will indeed be able to deal with the crisis that we are in. Dick? Please unmute.
I don't think there were anything new. They are, I mean, the president and the leaders of Eskom and the government as such, they are continuing on the same path as before. And I mean, it is a path of privatization. And when it comes to the finances, it is a path of austerity also. And as you know, this was hotly debated now with the Budget Justice Coalition and others in the Finance Committee. I think it was 2 days ago. And there's a lot of criticism against the austerity, the harsh austerity policy. So one thing that the president was addressing was the over 50 billion rand of debt that the municipalities and even government departments have to Eskom. And one wonders how this large bill or delayed payments, how this will be addressed in such a economic environment when the departments and the municipalities also are hit by austerity. He spoke about how the Department of Public Works kind of heroically has come in and paid off this year some over $500 million of this debt to Eskom. But I mean, the debt is over 50 billion. So it is not a solution. So you can't pay off this debt and at the same time have this austerity policy. So that is only one contradiction that the government is battling with. So they are sitting between a rock and a hard place. And in my opinion, they are creating both places themselves. It's not necessary to do like this. So that is kind of like a first remark to the president.
Jose, anything that stood out for you?
Thank you. There's nothing new per se, but there's a relatively more detail with respect to the debt that Eskom has, particularly with the medium-term budget policy statement that the Minister of Finance has now confirmed that they will look at this debt, at least a third or two-thirds of it, from Eskom perspective. Now, one may say that this is still going to be government debt, but I think the difference that this will make within Eskom is that Eskom is obviously a large input to our economy in terms of the electricity. So in terms of making supporting them to reduce the debt, that will help them hopefully do better in terms of their balance sheet, be able to pay less in terms of the interest, and be able hopefully to perform more on the reliability of the plants, that more maintenance should be done. We hope that that is the case. We also hope that it will accelerate the new transmission company being taken out of Eskom, and the independent, them being able to purchase from independent power producers and others. But for the immediate term, in terms of load shedding, there's nothing that's new. The other issue that, I don't know if he mentioned it, but yes, he did refer to it in terms of monitoring Andre de Ruyter's performance, is the new board that has come in within Eskom. As you would know, in the past, the board, there was a lot of vacancies within the Eskom board, so there is a new board that's come on stream. But these are not short-term measures that will address load shedding in the short term.
Well, I mean, on the first points you raised, Jose. Yes, when the finance minister gave his budget speech over a week ago, people looked at what he was saying with a great deal of interest. And I think subsequent to that, if I'm not wrong, I think it was Moody's that then improved Eskom's rating. But what analysts, pundits have been pointing out is that since then, whenever the finance minister has been quizzed on this to get a sense of what it exactly means, he has been blowing hot and cold.
The devil is in the detail, Buyo, unfortunately.
Well, that's exactly the detail people are looking for, and which they are not getting.
We'll probably hear that only in February, but we hope that there will be what he mentioned. At least this time around, he came up with some figures between a third and 2/3. That's an improvement from nothing in all these years that we've been asking about this question. So let's hope that we are not kidding ourselves.
Well, Dick, I want to play a soundbite about what he said about the points you raised around municipalities, which strengthens your point around austerity, and what he then subsequently, perhaps without admitting, I've never come across any of the government ministers and officials admitting to austerity. But what he said around municipalities and how the government is going to assist is what he seems to think is partly, at the very least, what will begin to deal with Eskom's money problems.
The debt that is owed to Eskom by our municipalities, as well as government departments, stands at more than 50 billion rand. We have made it clear that non-payment for services is unacceptable, and have taken a number of steps to ensure that payment of these debts is recovered. For this reason, we have established a multidisciplinary revenue committee, and Eskom is part of this committee, to address payment of debt to the utility by municipalities and various other organs of state.
A multidisciplinary debt payment committee. Before you answer, perhaps, Dick, and I need to perhaps put in the picture of what I was thinking as that was being mentioned. The Eskom problems with municipalities, for example, have been around for quite some time. And the Deputy President has been chairing that interministerial committee that's supposed to deal with these issues. Up until now, I think I'm yet to see what they have actually done, whether the results that they have actually produced. And the standoffs between Eskom and municipalities is well known. Now, to set up another multidisciplinary payment committee, one is just not sure how that's going to work, whether that's going to yield anything, given how similar structures, which were as good as they get, because if you have the Deputy President chairing that, then it's supposed to be, in fact, the whole point of locating this within the presidency was meant to bring results, but which we haven't seen. But maybe now that the government is saying we actually don't have money, to like a lot more money to give to Eskom, maybe this time around it'll work. But I don't know what your thoughts are. But I thought I needed to give you that to put in the picture as to where my skepticism came from.
Yeah, I think the main thing is what is the political framework within this, so that this new committee now is working within. That is the main issue. And we have I think that the thing about letting in independent power producers and expose Eskom to more and more competition with the private sector, that spells trouble within a short time. And the reason is that Well, I can quote from the Integrated Resource Plan of the so-called IRP from 2019. Eskom's existing generation plants will still dominate the South African electricity installed capacity for the foreseeable future. And the current and future performance of these plants are critical for the security of the supply of electricity, and the capacity plan to be sort of introduced under this so-called IRP. And I mean, if wind and solar power generation operates sort of by the independent power producer system, Eskom has to buy a lot of wind and solar power, which goes up and down, and they are the ones who, Eskom is the one who has to sort of modernize and sort of keep the grid modern enough to take on this pressure. And at the same time, I mean, for the coming 10, 15 years, 60% of the power that we have in South Africa, it will be produced by these coal power stations, which the private sector will not take over. And at the same time, Eskom is then bound to lose the revenue, which is more secure, but which will now kind of be taken by the private sector. So it seems like this spells a coming financial trouble for Eskom, and it will reduce it to what is called a kind of zombie utility, because it will have all this pressure on itself, but the revenue will be shrinking and shrinking, and at the same time it has all this responsibility put on it, which you can't take away from it. So that is one problem. Then you have the looting problem. And there, I mean, the President Ramaphosa also addressed the black economic empowerment. And when it comes to sort of black managers and bringing in black managers in the boards and so on, that is all well. But when it comes to the whole procurement systems, I mean, that is one source of what has destroyed the ruling party. So the whole plan to reduce the public sector's share of the economy, not only Eskom, but on other instances also, it is something that, and it's spread into a social movement, you can say also, when you have the looting and when you have, because of increasing poverty and inequality, syndicates, it's easy for them to recruit workers, so to speak, to continue to loot the utility with cable theft and impugned contracts and all that thing. So what shall this multidisciplinary committee do about all this if it is working within the same paradigm of privatizing Eskom and not opposing the general austerity measures of the government?
And so I mean, the other thing that multidisciplinary, I mean, debt payment committee would have to deal with is essentially, you know, the politics around Eskom, what it has to do, and because, I mean, in the same way that interministerial committee led by the deputy president has been tiptoeing around issues and never really resolving anything. You have, I mean, take a listen to this. I mean, you have the chairperson of the ANC in Gauteng, who is the newly elected premier, Lesofie, saying the other day that, you know what, those poor people in Soweto should be forgiven, scrap that debt, because, I mean, they're just not going to be able to deal with it. Take a listen to what the president had to say around that, because that question was in fact posed in Parliament today.
One can understand where the Premier is coming from. It's an aspirational wish that it would be good if that were to be done. Now, at the same time, we've got to balance this aspirational wish with other considerations. The first is that South Africans must pay for the services that they use. the user pay principle does need to be observed by all of us, largely because as the state carries quite a big burden and a heavy one. When you look at our budget, the social support of our budget is way over 50%. But at the same time, one understands the hardships that the people, not only of Soweto, but poor people around our country are going through. Prices of nearly everything have gone up. At the same time, we also have to understand Eskom's own position. Eskom is reeling under a huge burden of debt. So when one looks at all those three considerations, one needs to arrive at a balanced conclusion. Firstly, look at the burden on the state, the enormous burden that our people carry, poverty, unemployment, and in some cases, hopelessness. And at the same time, look at the burden that Eskom carries. Now, with all this, I can understand where the Premier comes from, and we therefore need to have a balanced discussion to see how best these problems that, yes, our people in Soweto and a number of other places. I mean, there are many municipalities that owe huge amounts of money to Eskom. And that is under discussion, and we're seeking to find ways of addressing municipal debt. Debts can be written off, but sometimes there needs to be conditions under which debts can be written off. And it happens all over the world. And in this case as well, discussions therefore need to be entered into to see how we balance everything. So let me say the Premier is not mad, and our people's needs are recognized, and the burden on the state should also be recognized.
We still need to have a balanced discussion around these issues for me, Jose. Because you will have thought that, I mean, for the same reason I opened this conversation touching on, which is that we are in a crisis. We know that we have nowhere else to get the money from. And this was the president's last appearance before the national legislature. Now, if we haven't had these discussions up until now, or we are able to take positions, whether they are popular or not, I don't know if we'll ever get there.
No, this one is a bit tricky. I think the president did answer, but did not answer the question, because I think that the honest truth is that it's going to be difficult for the president to say we are not going to deal with the Soweto debt and the municipal debt, mainly because the challenges are political, in my view, and the elections are coming up, so it's very difficult to discuss those things. He said we'll find a balance, but he answered the question without really answering it, in my view. Let's
leave that to them. That's going to become his problem, no doubt about that, because it would seem that the Gauteng Premier and chairperson of the ANC in the biggest and richest province is pinning his hopes on this one, and perhaps the e-tolls. But that's another perhaps a discussion point for perhaps another panel. Let me bring you to what your expertise are around. Now, Eskom has said that the fact of the matter is that they need to maintain, right? Maintenance of the aging coal-fired fleet is a big problem. It's what is giving us the load shedding that we are experiencing, and your Medupis and Kusiles are not giving us what we thought they would give us by now. But he also then says that your alternative sources aren't giving us what we need right now, Jose?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the financial woes, Buyo, I mean, one debt that really should be written off and discussed, that is the debt of Eskom to the World Bank. I mean, the so-called odious debt from the $3.75 billion loan, which was given in 2010. So that's the first issue, which is not debated here. The other thing is the full cost recovery principle of Eskom. If you have a public utility and if you have poverty and low-income earners like in South Africa, you have to sell electricity at rebated prices. And I mean, it's been a long-standing demand from the civil society. A benchmark would be 350 kilowatt hour sort of for free to the households, and over that, which sort of managed to run a household normally, and over that you start to pay because you can't have electricity completely for free, but at the same time you have to rebate the electricity bill. And there comes also the fact that because of austerity or because of the poorly run finances of municipalities, they are marking up the prices from Eskom exorbitantly. So, I mean, in some municipalities, 30-40% of the income to the municipality is from the electricity bills. And of course, that is also kind of impossible. So I think there have to be a debt moratorium, and the full cost recovery principle had to be scrapped at Eskom, which should be a public utility. And I mean, thirdly also, and we've been pushing this for many times, and it was debated now and put on the table by the Budget Justice Coalition, which represents 22 different organizations, that the debt of Eskom and the interest rates that Eskom is paying to the state pension fund, which doesn't need this money, which is about 7-8 billion, 20% of the claims and the interest payment of Eskom is to the own public sector. And as the state pension fund doesn't need this income to pay the pension and benefits of the members, then this is really something to look at for the government. But for some reason, this internal kind of rip-off of Eskom, that is kind of like a no-go area. So there are many things to be done if you have sort of a more broad-minded view on the politics of this. There are many things that has to be done to this. And it is about austerity. It is about the looting and the procurement system and the long-standing project to sort of create a black business class, which has kind of completely gone off track. If you read Hafeji's Days of Zondo, and then you get the picture of what has been happening. So that is also, it will not be on the table of this committee that is established, but it should be on the table in the public debate. And the whole paradigm has to be shifted. We need a public utility and we need electricity. And when it comes to the debt of the poor and the prices that the poor and the working class are paying for electricity, it has to be subsidized. And that will only be done by a public utility. It will never be done by the private sector. And I mean, it also goes about fighting the climate change and so on. I said at the last discussion we had that the private sector will only save us from climate crisis if it's done at the right price. And I mean, the price now is one of the things that has been delaying this so-called bid window 5 with the independent power producers, because they demand higher prices from Eskom and the government from the electricity. And that's why it's all delayed. And that means also that the establishment of renewable energy in the country is also delayed. So it has to be led by the government, basically. The whole paradigm has to be shifted from private to public. And what is destroying the government party is procurement and the austerity policy now also, because that is inducing the power of syndicates which are looting Eskom.
Last word from you, I mean, Jose, with everything that Dick has just said, the delays and the ability or inability, perhaps I should say, of the private sector to give us what Eskom cannot give us. Where to from here? Where do we go? Are we stuck where we are if things are not going to get worse? Or do you think things are going to improve? And if so, on what basis would you base that on?
So Eskom is already dominating the power supply in South Africa because we have 95% of capacity that Eskom supplies, first and foremost. So you have we have a total of 58,000 megawatts in the country, and only 6,000 is from renewable energy IPPs. So the argument, I'm not sure I follow it properly. And secondly, the IPPs that are coming into the market are also going to supply private sector entities, like mining entities and all of that. That will reduce the burden on Eskom right now, which is not able to meet the needs of the country as we speak. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with the private sector providing capacity to supply the power. In terms of the renewable energy capacity, yes, obviously it's correct. There is intermittent capacity there. The reason why you have renewable energy supply is really more for environmental reasons than to have a reliable supply. The gas option that is being spoken about, hopefully it will come on stream soon, but it still also needs a lot of infrastructure. The procurement will start only next year in 2023. So there will be lead times, but that can help in terms of bringing in capacity that's relatively more reliable. Nuclear is also an option, but all of these are long-term issues. So I don't fully agree with the fact that when you bring in IPPs, they're not necessarily only renewable energy IPPs. They can be gas IPPs. They can be all sorts of other technology IPPs.
Dick Fosland, let me thank both of you for coming on the program this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, to BEE or not?
I don't think that there's anybody in this House who could dispute or argue the President's exposition of how abhorrent and damaging apartheid's race-based policies were. And that's not the argument today, nor whatever the intentions of BEE were. But let's look at what is practically happening on the ground. The Zondo Commission showed that BEE has been central to corruption in South Africa, be it the 14 billion PPE corruption during COVID, or the billions stolen through Eskom. A recent example, one of your own nephews, whose company scored contracts worth 381 million rand from Gauteng hospitals. And you write that it's not being felt by the majority of our citizens because BEE only benefits ANC-connected cronies. And it does so at the expense of everybody else, particularly the 35 million black South Africans who remain trapped in poverty. They suffer shoddy service delivery because of the inflated prices government must pay to BEE middlemen. The 280,000 rand broom at Eskom is an example. Now, last week, Eskom board member Mteto Inyati spoke truth to power, and he said that BEE will have to go if there's to be any chance of ending South Africa's electricity crisis. So why are you still clinging to this failing policy and not focusing on an empowerment policy that lifts people out of poverty and into opportunity, that is broad-based, that's not race-based, that focuses on poverty and not making BEE fat cats, but lifting the millions of black people in this country who have no opportunity at all, out of poverty and into opportunity.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Honourable Steenhuisen concedes that indeed what happened in our past was exclusionary. It excluded black people, and the policies that were pursued in the past were damaging, not only to the economy of our country, but to the people of our country. What BEE seeks to do and to achieve, and let's be clear, The whole concept of BEE is enshrined in our Constitution. It is a constitutional imperative. There's just no way any one of us can run away from that reality and dispute the fact that the Constitution is very clear. There was no equality in the past. The Constitution says there must be equality. The opportunities that were there in the past were only available to a certain group, and you now say cronies. And I don't want to be disrespectful to the white people of our country and reduce them to by any term. But the policies of the past favored them. It privileged them, and many white people do concede that. They do say, yes, we were privileged over and above the black people, the majority of people in our country. So that is a given. And now that being a given, we've got to correct that. And we correct it by applying the terms of our Constitution, not what is in Honorable Steenhuisen's head.
President Cyril Ramaphosa there responding to the leader of the official opposition, John Steenhuisen. My guests for this one are Black Management Forum Acting President Sesethu Mangcwetjwa and the Free Market Foundation's Executive Director, and that's Mr. Leon Low. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time. Sesethu, I don't know what you perhaps said the tone. If you can, just your thoughts, just from the little we were able to listen to from the president there, responding, of course, to the leader of the Democratic Alliance.
Well, Vuyo, actually, what happened in Parliament happens at a time that coincides with the BMF's annual policy conference, which took place at Gallagher Estate today, with the theme reimagining a triple BEE future, where we're really saying as the BMF that we need not throw out the baby with the bathwater. The BEE legislation is still relevant today, and in fact, those that say that it should be disposed of are probably being disingenuous. What we should be looking at, we're saying as the BMF, is how to broaden, how to strengthen, and how to make it more effective, and really look at where are the blind spots, perhaps, of the policy that make it vulnerable to things like malfeasance. For example, if you look at public procurement, which is actually quite a strong tool to transfer economic power into the hands of the previously disadvantaged. What we need to do is to ensure that the public procurement bill, which is currently being reviewed, delivers on that constitutional imperative and closes the loopholes that would make it vulnerable to malfeasance. But we need not throw out the entire BEE legislation and aspects of it such as public procurement, because those are real tools and levers, Vuyo, that government can use to transfer economic benefit of this country into the hands of the previously disadvantaged.
It's a constitutional imperative. Leon Low?
Yes, I think we need to be very careful here about a few things. Firstly, there's a direct link between a country's wealth and the amount of energy it has. It's one of the tightest links you get in economics or social science. So we need to understand that you cannot be wealthy if you don't have a lot of electricity. Our electricity capacity has not increased for basically 2 decades and is in fact declining in terms of what is actually available. So we have to have electricity. That is a precondition for being prosperous. Now, we can talk all we wish about correcting the wrongs of the past. I've been myself and still am a great activist for it, and work, for example, for the truly poor, so-called historically disadvantaged, which is just a word for meaning black. And I don't know why we don't actually say what we mean. But nonetheless, to try and ensure that black people get ownership of their land and jobs and informal business. And every State of the Nation address says we're going to remove red tape, while in Parliament there are bills that increase red tape. So we need to just stop stifling the economy. BEE can only take place when you have wealth, when you're rich. You can't redistribute poverty. And so the first thing we have to do is become rich. How do you become rich? You free up the economy, you make it investor friendly, you remove all the red tape, you liberate the poor, liberate small business, and then we can take off and everybody can be rich. But let's just get to the issue of Eskom itself.
Before you get there,
apartheid dinosaur.
Before you get there, Leon, let me just take you back. Let me just take you back.
Every other country.
Let me just take you back. Let me just take you back to what you said, because I don't want to raise too many issues, and we are not able to interrogate them properly. When you say you can't redistribute poverty, I mean, remember where the apartheid state started. I mean, it deliberately, set out to empower white people particularly. So those who have become rich out of that system cannot, with all honesty, claim that they pulled themselves up with their bootstraps. So, and I guess that's where being disingenuous, which I said to touch on, comes from for people who are opposed to black economic empowerment.
Yeah, I think we're missing the point over here. The point is whether we want to make the victims of apartheid, which was an absolutely disgusting, racist crime, horrific thing, and that nobody could be an apologist for it or justify it. It's not a case of people lifting them up by their bootstraps. It's a case of liberating people, freeing people economically. We need to try and understand what causes poverty. The natural human condition is prosperity. People trade and produce wealth and work. So what are we doing that keeps people down? Now, I'm happy to say black people, but they are being kept down. That is the problem that we face. And we need to overcome that. We need to stop that. We need to stop suppressing and stifling people becoming rich. We should be a rich country. And if we're a rich country and we're a growing country and we're like China or India or Mauritius or like Rwanda, and there are many, many examples in the world, then the BEE thing will become pretty much irrelevant if everyone's getting wealthy. It is because we're not getting wealthy that we are obsessed with how to redistribute poverty.
Of course, I mean, this conversation as it is happening within the context of, Eskom and its abject failures, which was the theme, in large part of your conference today. But also, I mean, this conversation this week was, I think, enriched, if you ask me, by inputs from several other people, among them Mr. Mteto Nyati, who is the board member of Eskom, who of course put a bureaucratic cat among pigeons, but also people like Rudy Dix from Operation Vulindlela, because they dared to point out that part of Eskom's problem is the fact that BEE was misappropriated, the fact that corruption came under the guise, of black economic empowerment, and one would imagine that these are the blind spots that you were referring to.
100% Vuyo. So I think I'll start by saying that we at the BMF have a great respect for not only Mr. Mteto Nyati, but particularly the chairperson of the Eskom board, Mr. Mpoma Kwana, who is a BMF stalwart and who really played a fundamental role in the time when BMF was at the forefront of drafting BEE and employment equity legislation. So without getting into who was misquoted and who wasn't misquoted, the BMF has taken a deliberate decision not to engage in a public spat about the comments of Mr. Mteto Nyati, but we have reached out to Paul Magwana, who, as I've said, has got a good relationship with the BMF, and we've sought an audience with the Eskom board to understand what Mr. Mteto Nyati meant. And if you look at his track record, really, it becomes hard to believe that the where he was coming from was from a position of saying BEE and employment equity legislation must be completely thrown out. But rather, he was agreeing quite with Justice Raymond Zondo, who was saying things like public procurement, BEE, are all good policies, but which have been abused and have been used for malfeasance and for state capture and for self-enrichment. And we would like to believe that that is the spirit in which Mr. Mteto Nyati was speaking. Be premature, really, of us, because we haven't had the engagement with Eskom. Mr. Magwana has committed to give us time slots to meet with him, and I think only then the BMF will really be in a strong position to come back and say this is our view on the utterances of Mr. Mteto Nyati, number one, but on the general orientation of the new Eskom board. We must say that when they were appointed, we were very excited with the caliber of the people who were appointed into that board. And I was listening to an interview of Paul Magwana on 702 the one morning about the firing of Andre de Ruyter and the COO. And he very calmly said, when you're a new board and you walk into a new entity, the first thing you need to do is to actually performance contract with the people that you find there, and then you performance manage them. And against that, when they do not perform, then you enter into discussions about parting ways. And we thought that was very mature, very measured. And so we are watching what is happening at Eskom with a very close eye. But fortunately for us, we're in a position where these are people who we have got a very good relationship with, and we have chosen very deliberately as the BMF to engage in constructive engagements with the colleagues on the Eskom board. And I think once we've done that, the BMF will be in a position to come back to you, Vuyo, and the audience of SABC, and really then articulate what the BMF's view is on this issue.
Leon, if I might take you back to something you said, earlier, you're not, or are you, maybe that's how I should ask it, suggesting that under the current environment, with everything we know, with all the wrongs that were committed, as SA2 articulated some of them, some of the stuff that came out of the state capture inquiry, what Judge Zondo had to say, what Mteto Nyati has had to say, with all the reputation he comes with, the fact that black economic empowerment was abused and misused. Will you still argue that there is no room in the turnaround of Eskom for black economic empowerment, but done or implemented correctly?
Can I come in there?
Yes.
Yes. We need to understand something very carefully. What Mteto Nyati, a man of immense stature, and other people, Busi at Mavuso and others, are saying is that we need to get Eskom to work. Now, how do you do that? Frankly, the board's hands are tied. The management's hands are tied. They are regulated by NERSA, the National Energy Regulator. They are not allowed to trade. They are told what contracts to sign. They are politically managed, not managed by their board, but by politicians who know nothing about energy. And BEE is completely irrelevant, if I may say. It's very important to get this.
Well, the operative words were done right or done correctly. Those are the operative words, done right or done correctly. In other words, I want to sort of go back to what happened. I mean, we know the history of black economic empowerment. It went wrong. The empowerment of a few well-connected people. We know that history. Are you saying there's no room whatsoever, given what you said at the beginning, for black economic empowerment to be implemented properly, correctly, taking into account the history and the background to it? In other words, the operative words are done properly, done correctly.
Sorry, Vuyo, I must just say that I can hardly hear you. So if I talk over you, then please understand it's not me being rude. It's a very, very bad sound that's coming through. So my apology for that. But yes, it is very important to understand that there is nothing they can do. I'm of the view that Eskom should be liberated. It should be freed from control by NERSA, for example. When Eskom applies for higher prices, there shouldn't be a price regulator. Nobody believes in price control anymore in the world. They should be able to charge whatever they wish, and they should be competitive. In other words, anybody should be free to enter into and compete with Eskom and sell electricity locally or nationally through the grid, whether renewables or whether nuclear or whether coal or gas doesn't matter. The point is that at the moment, Eskom's hands are tied by apartheid ropes. This is an old apartheid dinosaur. It's like SAA. Why are we still trying to make this old dinosaur live? The rest of the world has energy markets. The rest of the world has trading. The rest of the world has networks, grids that are independent of producers and distributors. We are sitting here with something invented 100 years ago, literally 100 years ago. Scrap it. And we want BEE, but we want BEE where there is empowerment. We don't want BEE where there's stagnation and poverty forced by politics. Politics does not allow Eskom to prosper, and politics must get out of the way.
Leon Low, let me thank both of you for coming on this evening. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll be able to do justice to these issues. But thank you so much for agreeing to come on today at the very last minute. And that's our show for tonight. Join us again tomorrow evening, same time.